Stay out of Hodister. The events that I'm about to describe took place when I was 10 or 11 years old. My cousin and I were actually quite good friends, even though our personalities could be quite the opposite. I lived in the city, afraid of nature and wilderness, and she lived in a small village in the south of my country near a farm. She was scared of large crowds and busy roads. Every time we invited each other to our homes, we would both learn about dealing with each other's surroundings. One day, she invited me for a sleepover so I could spend the weekend with her. When I finally came to her house, which is far from mine, she insisted to guide me through the village to show her friends and neighbors. I was quite surprised that most of the houses were actually abandoned. I guess most of the inhabitants left to the capital to find work. Anyways, she showed me one particular house that was for sale. She opened the small, rusted gate at the front of the house. I was surprised it wasn't locked, but I followed my cousin inside regardless. That house looked like it came straight out of a horror flick. Old, dark wood covered in moss, broken windows, and rusted bicycles in the backyard. Creepy, right? I love to hang out here on Halloween night, my cousin said, obviously proud of herself and her bravery. Is it legal to just walk into a home that's for sale? Isn't it somebody's property still? I replied, a bit concerned. This house has been for sale for 7 years. My friends go in there all the time. Don't worry, we won't get in any trouble. I wasn't really sure about this. It's not that I was scared by the house itself, but more that I was frightened about the idea of being caught by an adult while trespassing. See, my cousin used to be kind of a troublemaker. She used to steal and vandalize, and that alone was enough to make me skeptical about the legality of the situation. Eventually, I looked around and there was clearly no one there, so she dragged me into the backyard. The grass had grown tall and wild since there was no one there to take care of it. Mice skittered around, and there were more bicycles laid in the corner, broken and unusable. The front door is locked, so we'll enter from the back door, she said. Or at least that would have been the case if there was a back door left. Instead, there was a gigantic hole in the back wall. Anyone could go in the living room whenever he or she wanted. We went inside, and the first thing I noticed was the strong smell of rot. There were some creepy old toys scattered on the floor, and I just stared in disbelief. I thought it was too stereotypical of an old haunted house to be real. Someone must have set the mood on Halloween by decorating the house in this manner. It couldn't be real. A tree even grew to the second floor through the window. As we proceeded through the house, the stench became stronger. I walked behind my cousin, starting to get scared. Suddenly, she stopped. I ended up bumping into her back, and I looked at her face, trying to see her eyes. Before I could see anything, she turned around and ran to the corner of the room to puke. I knew this didn't mean anything good. Usually she can take any sort of gory sight without even flinching, but I dared to look forward, and I immediately regretted it. The sight was blood-chilling. Before me was a dog laying on the ground, a husky, I think. It clearly died recently. Some blood was still running on the ground, and only a few flies were around it. His eyes were empty and almost transparent, and his mouth was ajar, with his tongue rolling back into his throat. Some saliva dripped and stained the old carpet floor. His paws were stained with red, and his nails were broken. His tail was tucked between his legs. The poor, pathetic thing. His skull was cracked open, blood dripping from his head. His brain was visible and scattered on the floor. All I could do was stare, retaining a scream in the depths of my throat. Tears started to roll down my cheeks, and my teeth began to clack. I have never felt such fear and disgust before. Eventually, I got sick too. My first reflex was to look around for anyone else in that house. All I could see was my cousin kneeling down, wiping her mouth with her hand. She grabbed an old baseball bat that was stained with blood and broken at some of the sides. I ran to her and slapped her hand so she dropped it. "We need to go right now," I whispered. She nodded, and I grabbed her arm and dragged the both of us out of that room. We ran as fast as we could through the house, still trying not to make too much noise. Then I booked it for the front door and tried to open it. The noise it made was way too loud. I jumped, scared that someone might have heard or saw the door moving from the outside. My cousin slapped the back of my head and whisper shouted, "I told you it was locked." But with another firm yank, the door flew open and we ran through the backyard, slamming the metal gate behind us and dashing to the other side of the road. Panting and trying not to completely break down and bawl, I sat down on the sidewalk, holding my head. Looking up, I noticed that my cousin was already walking towards her own house, her hand in front of her mouth. I quickly followed her, and a long silence followed. Still having that strange feeling of being watched, I turned around to see a black van rolling forward, very slowly behind us. Needless to say, I instantly felt like I was being followed. A van like that was not normal in such a small village, and it certainly wouldn't ride that slowly down the streets, especially behind two people on the sidewalk. Panic starting to rise, I tried not to be too obvious and look away. I glanced forward, acting as if I was looking at the old barn head. Making sure my cousin heard me, I whispered through my teeth, "On the count of 3, we run like hell." "To where?" she asked, her voice quiet and full of fear. "Down the path between those 2 houses. I knew the car couldn't fit in there and follow us on the path, plus it would eventually lead us to my cousin's home." "1, she began. 2, I followed. And on 3, we sprinted like our lives depended on it. Hell, they probably did. We ran down the dark, narrow road. It was a dead end. I turned around, fearing for my life. The car froze for a minute at the mouth of the pathway. Unsure of if someone was going to come out after us, we looked at one another with terror. However, a few more moments passed, and then it simply turned away, down the road which leads out of the village. I released an immense sigh of relief. Maybe the driver was truly just innocent enough, and wanted to be careful seeing as 2 young children were running on the sidewalk and into a dark, narrow alleyway. Perhaps he thought we were fooling around. But I can't say if this was truthfully the case, especially with the tinted windows and the fact that it was parked so very close to the house with the horrors inside. Maybe these events were pure coincidence, but what I fear is that my imagination may not be wrong. After all, we never did go deeper into that house. Who knows what else could have been in there? Years have passed, and now my cousin is living somewhere else. I wrote the story to warn people about that village. This was not the only awful thing that's happened there. There are many more stories and local legends around that perhaps I'll share someday. The village's name is Hodister in Belgium. If you ever come across this place, do not stop there. Just keep on moving through. I never did hear about that house again, or the black van for that matter. All I know is that, for some reason, the topic has become very taboo. I cannot even bring up the subject when our parents are around. I'm scared there's something more sinister going on, but I'm too afraid to ask. As it is, even now, when I think back to that awful sight inside the house, my stomach hurts and I tear up a little. Thank you for reading my story, and I hope you never experience the same.